It's now my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker today, Vijay Gupta, a man with a profound understanding of the healing power of the arts. Vijay has made it his life's work, although I think he's not even 30 yet, so life's work till 30, to spread the healing power of music to those who need it most, to audiences who far too often live outside the reach of the traditional arts community. Vijay was drawn to music long before discovering its immense potential to affect positive social change. As a young child, he began taking piano and violin lessons, and by age 6, he had earned a spot in the pre-college program at Juilliard. Vijay began performing internationally at the age of 8 and made his solo debut at age 11 with the Israel Philharmonic. Over the years, Vijay proved that his musical talent was matched by his intellect, graduating with a biology degree at the age of 17 and then a master's in music from Yale University at the age of 19. In that same time frame, he did research at several colleges and universities around spinal cord regeneration, Parkinson's disease, and the effect of pollution on the brain. In 2007, the LA Philharmonic selected Vijay out of a pool of 332 candidates to join the orchestra as its youngest member. In 2011, Vijay combined his passion for music with his interest in mental health issues, founding Street Symphony. And today, in addition to this impressive litany of accomplishments, Vijay has become a TED Senior Fellow and is known around the globe, worldwide, as a compelling advocate for the redemptive and regenerative power of music. We are incredibly honored to have him here with us today, and please join me in welcoming Vijay Gupta.
Thank you. Thanks so very much. In 2011, a very brave US Congresswoman survived an assassination attempt. Her name is Gabrielle Giffords, and she was someone who made her life passionately speaking on behalf of immigration reform and gun control, and then one day in January 2011, a bullet ripped through her left hemisphere of her brain and knocked out her speech center. And Gabby was airlifted out of Tucson into Houston. She was placed into a coma so that her brain could rest. And when she woke up, she couldn't speak because the bullet had knocked out her speech center in her brain. And this was a devastating injury for someone who had made their lives speaking so eloquently on behalf of humanity. And so Gabby went through physical therapy, she went through occupational therapy, she also went through music therapy. There's a beautiful video of Gabby having a really difficult day. And she's wearing a green jacket and a cap, and she's had a tracheotomy, and she's sitting down with her therapist, and she's sobbing. And her therapist reaches out and puts a hand on her shoulder and says, "It's gonna get better. I know this is really frustrating. It's gonna get better. Do you want to sing with me?" And they sing. "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." And Gabby is pronouncing each word. "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." She sits up straight. "Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine." And at that moment, Gabby shines. Her personhood shines, her humanity shines. Music lights up the entire brain. There is no music center in the brain. From the very front in the prefrontal cortex, our planning centers, all the way to the back of our brain, our so-called reptilian brain, our emotional centers, our balance centers, all of these places are engaged when we do an MRI scan and we see someone either playing or listening to music. And so how interesting would it be for neuroscience to come back to music to understand the way that the brain worked? Music is an incredible neuropsychiatric modality, and the kinds of therapies that happen for Gabby Giffords have the root in the lab of a man named Gottfried Schlaug. And Schlaug is mentioned in Oliver Sacks's famous book, Musicophilia. And Gottfried Schlaug was one of the first MRI scientists, the people to do work with neuroimaging and music and the brain. And he was working with stroke victims who were aphasic. They had a similar injury to Gabby Giffords in that their speech center had been knocked out. But Schlaug had the good fortune of having some very emotive patients. And there are people who loved singing. So whereas these people couldn't string along a couple of words like, "How are you?" they could sing the words to their favorite Eagles song. And so he started giving his patients singing lessons. And he did MRI scans all the way throughout, and then he started weaning them off the music. And at the end of these studies, he found that the music had literally rewired the brains of his patients to create a homologous speech center in the right, undamaged hemisphere of the brain to make up for the damaged left hemisphere. Now, I had the good fortune of meeting Dr. Schlaug. As you noticed, my last name is Gupta, so I grew up in a family that expected me to be a Dr. Gupta. And so, yeah, that's a story that requires a drink. But I was very lucky to be sitting in Gottfried Schlaug's lab, and I was talking to him, and he was showing me these amazing studies of the effects of music on the brain, that late-stage Alzheimer's patients who have forgotten the names of their families and friends can still pick out a tune by Chopin that they learned at the piano when they were 7 or 8 years old. And deeply Parkinsonian patients find that their gait and tremor and speech steadies when they listen to music that they love. But I had an ulterior motive of visiting Gottfried Schlaug, and it's because I was trying to escape my parents' demands. And Schlaug had a similar story. He had trained in Vienna as an organist. He was a world-class musician, came to Harvard like you do, got an MD, PhD, became one of the leading neuroscientists in the world. And I was there to ask him, what was it like for you to give up music? What was it like for you to know that you couldn't go back to playing the organ the way that you used to when you were at school? And he said to me, listen, medicine is going to wait. In fact, science will only get better. The violin is not going to wait for you. And so I started to formulate my escape plan for my family. A couple of years later, I met a man named Nathaniel Ayers. And he was the subject of a book and a movie called The Soloist. And Nathaniel's story has become a beacon for homelessness and mental health advocacy throughout the United States, but he became my friend. And in fact, Nathaniel was one of my greatest teachers, because he not only taught me how music was a form of communication that could go deeper than words, but Nathaniel also taught me the realities of experiencing mental illness, of being homeless and living on Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles. When I first met Nathaniel and I started to experience Skid Row, I started to feel like a hypocrite. Because here I had won this amazing job in the Los Angeles Philharmonic, but if I ever wanted to be a doctor, and I wanted to be a doctor like Paul Farmer, who went to Haiti or Ethiopia, I wasn't needed in those countries. Public health services were needed in downtown Los Angeles, in Southern California, where 80,000 people experience chronic homelessness. Through meeting Nathaniel, I learned that the de facto treatment of mental illness in the United States is incarceration. And that when we put people out of sight, we put them out of mind. And so I wanted to reach more people like Nathaniel. And I started reaching out to homeless shelters and clinics and jails. I would take my violin and go play for the heads of departments of mental health, and they wouldn't return phone calls, and I don't think it's because I played badly. But I went down to Skid Row, and I played for the social workers there. And these people who had experienced a life of despair, of addiction, of homelessness, it was these social workers who reached into their pockets and pulled out crumpled $5, $10, $20 bills to buy sandwiches and cookies and Cokes for their homeless mentally ill patients to attend our concerts at a basement conference room at the mental health clinic on Skid Row. That's where Street Symphony started 170 concerts ago. Through the course of these concerts, I visited a place called the Patton State Hospital. And that's in San Bernardino, and the point is you should not know where San Bernardino is in California. And the point is you should not know where or what or where Patton is in San Bernardino. Everyone who's there is there because they've committed a crime due to a serious mental illness. And I played solo violin for 2 compounds there. And at the end of my first concert, a gentleman in the room stood up and he said, "Do you know any songs that we know? Anything that we could sing along with?" And the first thing that came to my head was the Titanic theme song. And then immediately how there could not possibly be something worse to play in a state hospital than the Titanic theme song. And so I kind of demurred, and I said, oh, maybe next time, and I said, there's not going to be a next time after what just happened. And he stood up, and he started singing to me. And he sang, "Jesus is on the main line." You know this song? Jesus is on the main line. Call him up and tell him what you want. If you want to get well, tell him what you want. If you're down and out and want to get out, tell him what you want. It was the most profoundly beautiful gift, the most healing gift I've ever received in my life. Because yes, the science is amazing. The way that music influences and impacts the brain and our body is amazing, but music heals our hearts as well. There's an amazing writer, a spiritual teacher in Africa named Malidoma Patrice Somé. And he shares 2 anecdotes. And the first is about mental illness, and the second is about art. And in indigenous communities, when someone is experiencing a psychosis, they're not seen as less than. They're seen as having a more permeable membrane with the other side. And so an entire community gathers around this person and creates a container for them to experience whatever they're experiencing. And they are seen as living works of art for people to experience and learn from. And when we talk about restorative justice and we talk about restorative models of caring for people who are experiencing psychosis, we now find that, yes, we need to have important pharmaceuticals, we need to have therapy, but most importantly, we need to have that community. We need to have a network of people that hold someone, receive them for their full humanity, and celebrate them. And so May teaches us about art in indigenous cultures, that the word for art and the word for sacred were the same. And a culture that preserved its art in one building was seen as having a kind of sickness, because that society, that culture was afraid of losing its stories. And so I say to all of us, what are the stories that we need to keep within our community and not place on a pedestal, but literally feast from? I heard at the beginning of this session, when we teach a child to draw, we teach them to see. What beautiful words those are. When we teach a child to design, we teach them the geometry of a world that exists beyond. And I think that beyond is the key word here. That when we teach a child to make art, we also need to create the space to receive their art. We need to create a space to receive the lessons that they teach us. President Obama recently wrote in a letter that the job of the artist is to disrupt our expectations and teach us something new about the world that exists amongst us and around us. And so I say that if healing is to occur, healing starts with the recognition of that something else and the deep embrace of it. And if we're empowering people to shine, then it's our turn to step back and give them that container, that platform, a container like ArtsFund, to let them shine, let them shine, let them shine. Thank you so very much for having me.